We are so excited to hear from my congressperson, Jamie Raskin. How are you, Congressman? We're so happy to be with you.
Hello, Erica. What a pleasure. Well, what a fantastic presentation that was. That was spellbinding. And for me, it was like going back to law school when I took taxation for the first time. And it opened my eyes to all of these tricks and gimmicks and ripoffs. And if we could take care of just a few of the basic ones you guys talked about, like the differential taxation of labor from capital gains, we would be making huge progress for the country. If we could just deal with stepped up basis, we'd be making huge progress for the country. So we know how these things work, but what they do is they build in a structural disadvantage for people who don't already have great wealth. And what I like about what you guys are saying is it's not kind of moralistic and judgmental, like these wealthy people or you wealthy people have done something wrong. You haven't done anything wrong, but we need to set up the tax system in such a way as not to sharpen and deepen inequalities in the country. And that's exactly what the current tax system does. Look, I don't know how political I'm allowed to get on your show, because I know you guys are of a, sorry?
C3.
You're C3, yeah. So so obviously it's a week before the election, and so everybody's minds are focused. But I mean, let me put it this way, in abstract terms rather than personal terms, we are in danger, we are in serious danger of becoming a failed state, an extremely wealthy state for some people, but a failed state for large parts of the population. A failed state is a state that cannot deliver the basic goods of existence and the basic benefits of a social contract to the people. What are those goods? Well, one would be security against disease, but we're not delivering that security. You know, we are number one in the world in COVID-19 infection. We are number one in the world in COVID-19 deaths. Our public health system is just riddled with inequalities, inefficiencies, and incoherence. Think about security for people generally in healthcare. We're not doing it. Even with the Affordable Care Act, we've got tens of millions of people left outside, and there's a war going on against the Affordable Care Act to try to throw another 20 or 25 million people off of healthcare and to strip away pre-existing condition coverage. What about security against random gun violence? You know, if you go back, you read the social contractarian philosophers like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The basic idea was you will leave a state of nature, which is a state of war, a state of violence, according to Hobbes. Remember, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. You leave that, you give up some of the mechanisms of violent self-defense that you have, you enter the social contract in order to be safer, to be safe against this. But here we are in a situation where we're in the social contract. 97% of the people support a universal background check on violent criminals, and we can't get it done because of the stranglehold that the NRA has over Congress, and specifically one of the political parties. So you just look at thing after thing, we are becoming a failed state. And what you're talking about is so central to it. I mean, you go back to Aristotle, and Aristotle was talking about the necessity of really muscular progressive taxation, because the people who are the large wealthy landowners, they derive a lot more benefit from society. They draw on a lot more resources of society than the paupers, the people who are living poor. And so for the ancient Greeks, it was just obvious that if you're trying to build some semblance of democracy, you've got to have progressive taxation. And all of our great small d Democrats have seen that either we can have great wealth and great disparities of wealth, or we can have democracy. But if you don't, everything's in danger. The founders of the country made an argument against inherited wealth because they said that wealth will just grow and grow and grow, and that the people who have it will get bored with just buying more boats and more houses. They will want to purchase public offices. They will want to be your governor. They will want to be your president. And that's exactly where we are today. People are using these massive disparities and inequalities of wealth in order to purchase political power and public office in a way that then reproduces and deepens and exacerbates those inequalities.
Congressman Raskin, you're so right. I mean, you just put it so beautifully. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about is that at a certain point, money is money and you buy stuff with it. But at a certain point, money is really not money anymore. And money is power. And people may think, well, I don't really want to limit somebody's money, but I think we have much less of a problem limiting somebody's power. And we've seen a huge power grab by the billionaires, basically.
But you know, it's funny, I don't even really view taxation or progressive taxation as limiting people's money, because I mean, the way that I think of it, and the Trump era is a good moment for us to focus on it. Our sense of well-being comes from some private expenditures. Like, we want to buy food that we know that we enjoy, and we want to make sure that's a private decision. I don't want some government bureaucrat or corporate bureaucrat telling me what I've got to eat, right? I want to choose that. But a significant part of our well-being is determined by patterns of public expenditure that we're invested in. If I'm driving down the street and all it is potholes and my car gets ruined, it is costing me money, it is costing me time, it's costing me aggravation to have to go and get it fixed, simply because we have not made the proper investments as a collective. So all of us are individuals in terms of our clothes and our food, and where we want to spend, allocate our money for special things. But all of us also are part of a community, and we make that investment in public things as an extension of our pursuit of happiness and our pursuit of well-being. So yeah, I mean, somebody might have $1 billion and they might say, well, I can pay for the fanciest lawyers to get out of paying any taxes at all. I will pay less than people who are waitresses and bricklayers. But ultimately, that's going to come back to haunt everybody, and also them. We all need to invest in the Commonwealth and in public things.
Let me throw a question to one of the millionaires. Why do you want to pay higher taxes? Morris?
Well, I would say I don't want to live in a failed country. And it's not like I have a lot of lawyers and accountants. I don't have any. But my tax rate, because I make long-term investments and because I make long-term capital gains, my tax rate is far less than yours or Congressman Raskin's. I'm old enough to remember, apartheid in South Africa in the 1970s and 80s. I've read about France in the 1800s in history. Neither of those ended well for the rich people. I've seen countries like Greece devolve into virtual anarchy for a while in 2013. I don't want that kind of country for my children and now grandchild to grow up in. I don't want the kind of instability that we've already started to see with people marching in the streets, and not just because one guy was murdered in Minneapolis or Louisville or wherever else, because there's millions of people that are being treated as second-class citizens, and they know it, and they don't seem to be willing to put up with this anymore. So we better do something about it.
Stephen, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think it's clear that we millionaires aren't crazy. I don't like taxes. I hate to pay taxes, but I love the United States of America. And for us to be naive enough to think that we can run this country without taxes is ridiculous. So I want to pay taxes because I think what's left behind me is as important as what my parents gave me in 1951 when I was born. A great country surviving World War II, where in the 60s, we built the interstate highway system. We went to the moon, and we fought this silly war in Vietnam. And we didn't come out of the 60s deeply in debt because we paid enough taxes to fund all that. We have to understand that the price of living in the United States of America requires taxes on the part of everybody, but certainly we wealthy.
Can I add something to that, Erica?
Yeah.
I appreciate that point very much. Most people you would prefer not to pay taxes if they didn't have to, but the vast majority of people understand you got to pay taxes. And what they hate is the idea that the richest people in the country can escape paying taxes because of the loopholes and the structural imbalances built into the tax system. And that's when people get really angry about it. And so, if somebody pays zero taxes or pays dirt year after year after year, or $750, and they're making hundreds of millions of dollars, it sends a really bad message to everybody else. And that's when people start saying, well, if he's not paying his taxes, I'm not going to pay my taxes. And then what happens to society? So Morris also reminded me of something. I read a book called The Spirit Level. And The Spirit Level, it's also like a website you can go to, but it reminds me a lot of what you patriotic millionaires are saying. The Spirit Level is interesting because they look at, well, what are the ingredients of success for a society? And what are the ingredients of failure? And you know that the single biggest ingredient of failure in a society is inequality. The more inequality is, the more it exacerbates every problem you can imagine, from disease to high school dropout to divorce to depression. Basically, what they say is that you end up with a tiny cast of people who are extremely wealthy, but they're fearful that they're somehow going to lose it, and they want to surround themselves with, security guards and wall themselves off, and so on. Then you've got people at the bottom who are desperately poor, who watch on TV how other people are living, and they suffer from intensely high rates of depression, suicide, and so on. They feel like there's something that they've done wrong because society is organized this way. And then there's a shrinking middle class, which is struggling to hang on to some sense of decency in how they live, but they're extremely anxious and extremely fearful. And they say, well, why does society have to be organized like that? And it really doesn't. So we should set up the tax system in such a way as to be continually investing in the common goods that we all need in order to have a sense of well-being and prosperity in our lives.
Representative Raskin, you're so right. And right now in America, y'all, about 35 or 40% of people make less than $30,000 a year. I mean, that's a huge chunk of people who are then watching all these billionaires make out like bandits. So, Congressman, this is a question that we think we'll be grappling with quite a bit next year. This is from Ashwin. And I'll expand this question a little bit. So this is from Ashwin. Congressman Raskin, some rich people claim residence in states that have low or no taxes. You might have seen Paul Singer just decided to move his giant hedge fund to Florida. Why not have a federal law that states that for those who are over a certain income range must also pay an additional tax that makes up the difference between the low no tax state and the most expensive taxes in the nation, like California and New York? Because we will see, Mitch McConnell said he wants the states to go bankrupt. Whatever you all end up doing with a relief bill, there are states that have no money in a federal government that can spend counter-cyclically. How are you going to navigate this, given that every state government on the planet is afraid that their millionaires are going to flee if you say boo at them, much less raise their taxes?
Yeah, and I mean, that's a constant recurring negative dynamic that's injected into tax policy, that the states are pitted against each other in this race to the bottom. We will continue to lower taxes in order to attract the millionaires. And federal tax law really should be the way to coordinate that and to develop certain basic minimal standards set across the board so you don't get that dynamic put in. And when you talk about taxing people beyond a certain level, Senator Warren had advocated as part of her presidential campaign the idea of a wealth tax. I can't remember at what level she started it, but it was like 400 million or 500 million or something, just taxing the overall estate. That's obviously controversial since we've focused on income taxes rather than taxing wealth, but it does suggest that we've got to look at dramatic changes in how we're doing things, because I think this is the work of Thomas Piketty, which has shown that when you look at it historically, capital always is getting higher gains and escaping taxation in a way that labor doesn't. And that just leads to these, just gaping inequalities in society.
Let's pick up on that one, and I'll kick this one to Morris. Morris, can you talk about, this investors saying that they're going to flee if we try to tax them? I mean, you explained that you're going to get higher, you're not going to get returns out of your mattress, but what about their argument?
Well, I mean, we've heard that here in New York from our governor of all people, even. I mean, what my response is usually when I'm in the Capitol on the second floor in Albany is that the people who move based on taxes, they don't live in New York now. And they also don't live in Maryland. Their grandparents moved to Kansas when Herbert Lehman raised their tax in 1932. So I'm not really worried about them. People are moving into New York because places like New York and Maryland and California and Connecticut, those are the states that have all the stuff that people want to move into, or people want to start businesses, or people want to work. So if you want to start a new business and you need sharp, engineers who can build software and apps and do stuff like that, you're not starting that business in Kansas or Florida. You're starting that business in New York in the shadow of the Flatiron Building, or in Northern California. And that's because these are the states where the states have enough money to do things to make them nice places to live for people. And it seems so straightforward to me. So no, I'm not worried about the rich people moving away.
So Chuck is our resident expert on estate tax and all of that. Chuck, how big of an obstacle, this is from Sarah Kay, how big of an obstacle is the demise of the rule against perpetuities in trying to close the transfer of wealth loophole? And if trusts can be perpetual, only the money that's taken out becomes subject to tax, right?
This is like Congressman Raskin back in law school now. But I think where we're seeing that is a number of states are abolishing their rule against perpetuities so that people can create trusts that can exist for centuries. That's why we should care about this. The rule against perpetuities is a way to keep those who've died long ago from still controlling the society that we live in today. So it is important to, and one way to do that is at the federal level. You can simply kind of override some of these states that are creating these dynastic trusts so that, at this moment, all these wealthy people are hiding their money and moving their money to these dynasty trusts. And states like South Dakota and Wyoming are the ones that are abolishing their rules against perpetuities so that these trusts can hoard billions forever. Congressman probably knows more about the rule against perpetuities than any of us here, so maybe we should.
Well, I've certainly forgotten a lot more about the rule against perpetuities than I remember. But I mean, the basic idea of the rule against perpetuities is that I guess it goes back to something that Tom Paine always used to say, and Thomas Jefferson, which is that the earth belongs to the living, and we shouldn't be governed by people who've already had their chance, who lived and died, and now they're still controlling the distribution of money. I mean, democracy has not just a political meaning, but also an economic and a financial meaning, right? And not only did the founders fear the idea that you would have intergenerational transmission of wealth that would be used to purchase public offices and political power, but they also felt that this was true in the economy too. I mean, Jefferson wanted to have a constitutional amendment against monopolies. And the antitrust tradition is very important for saying that the economy too should be open to all comers. We shouldn't allow just the first people who got there, whether it's Standard Oil or whether it's Google or Facebook, to dominate and become the gatekeepers to participation in commerce. it's got to be open to all comers, and that's the same idea. So I think we're moving into a period where we're going to have to rediscover, those small d democratic roots of breaking up political monopolies and the financial domination of politics, so there's real entry, so people can get into politics and it's not dominated by big wealth. But also the same thing on the economic side. People have got to be able to have their small businesses have access to markets and so on without being controlled by, behemoth corporations.
Stephen, go ahead, Stephen.
And I'm kind of sharing some of my personal stuff here. I have a pheasant hunting preserve out in Nebraska. And so I go out there to those big farm states, Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, those places out there, and they really get caught up on the inheritance tax as it relates to their 10, 20, 30,000 acre farms and ranches. And I get that. And there are either things that we could come up with to work around that, or we build into the tax code a way to deal with large estates, working farms differently. I don't know. I'm not that smart, but I know that we can't let that guide our tax code, especially as it relates to inheritance. I tell my kids all the time, and every Christmas when we all get together, if giving up 100% of my wealth before I die to save this country from what we're in right now, you guys are screwed, because I'm going to give it all away. You're not going to get anything if it will fix the problem. And I believe that from the bottom of my heart. America is more important than me or even my children. And I love my children as much as any father in the world, but America matters more.
Well, I mean, it's a beautiful thought. And, I think you guys are modeling not only smart political, economic, and social philosophy, but also smart manners and ways of living. I mean, the ordinary millionaire or billionaire can set up funds that will allow for the education of all of their kids and grandkids and grandchildren. What are considered basic needs and desires by most people can be taken care of. And then you still have 99% of your estate left over, right? And so you're raising, the point, Stephen, which is, well, what is all this money really for? And where does it come from? And what are our obligations to the broader community? And that your kind of patriotism is rare indeed, but it's very inspiring and moving. And I think it's awesome that you guys are aggressively getting out there and showing America that, a millionaire or billionaire doesn't have to be somebody who has contempt for you and thinks they're better than you because they've got money. It can be somebody who actually had a successful idea, but it doesn't have to totally warp their human values and destroy their way of thinking about what it means to be a member of the community.
I mean, I will say that it is a true stat that CEOs are 4 times more likely to be sociopaths than the general population. But be that as it may.
Well, that's true. But but that has to do with how the corporate world is set up and what kinds of qualities are rewarded. And it's similar to, well, we've seen it in politics. I mean, that kind of value system is now begun to permeate everything. The shocking thing is how many people who are considered the rabble and the plebeians who, the CEOs lampoon and mock and make fun of and have contempt for are willing to go along with it. I mean, there's just been a demolition of critical thinking skills in the public, and a conscription of the public to get behind an extremely inegalitarian, anti-democratic program.
You are so fabulous. We have several more questions in 4 more minutes. So I'm just going to pop out a few questions and then y'all can take them. So Ashwin says, this policy of getting tax breaks or investing in factories overseas where people are paid a pittance reduces costs for corporations while also lowering the taxes they pay to the US. Why don't we just simplify the tax code so that the corporations get no write-offs on their US taxes whatsoever for their expenses outside the US? Who wants to take that one?
Well, Chuck Collins might be the expert on it. I don't know.
Are you, Congressman?
Morris, do you want to take that one?
Well, I mean, you can't literally do that because there are legitimate companies that are in more than one country. So I mean, like, what if you had a company that did something in the United States and did something in Ireland, making something? You wouldn't say they have to pay taxes on all of their revenue from both places without subtracting their salaries in Ireland, for instance. So I mean, that's why our rules are so complicated, is because we're picturing a company that's really in the United States that kind of pretends it's in Ireland. But there are also companies that really are in Ireland that might have some small business in the United States for some reason, or are legitimately really in both places. So it's because of all these complicated cases that make it so complicated. Like, the guy who has really does have 1,000-acre work farm versus the corporation that has 1,000 acres, each one assigned to a separate little corporate entity they created in Liechtenstein or something. And it's hard to write enough laws to differentiate between all these different cases, especially when people are deliberately trying to obfuscate their situations.
Yeah, the answer is somewhat what the Europeans have done, which is they have country by country reporting. Everybody knows what corporation, there's transparency in what corporations are paying. And then there's treaties that basically say, well, you allocate based on what percentage of your business is actually based in a country. So that can be remedied, and we can model, the US can join the rest of the OECD countries and participate in a system that's already being created around fair taxes.
So Nancy Kelly asks, how do you see our current electoral contribution or our election contribution system is contributing to the problem, and how can that be changed? Congressman?
Well, the next step for this extremely right-wing Supreme Court will probably be to strike down limits on contributions, right? So Buckley versus Vallejo struck down limits on expenditures, and the court recently has said you cannot limit also overall contributions that are made. Citizens United then kind of blew the roof off the house and said, we're going to treat every corporate treasury in America as a potential political slush fund subject to the sole discretion of the CEOs. I mean, and the irony, of course, is that all of it was in the name of the shareholders who have the First Amendment rights, and it's their money, but the CEOs are spending it without the shareholders even being aware of it, much less getting to ratify it or participate in the decision of where it goes. So I do have legislation about that, saying that corporations shouldn't be able to spend anything unless you've got a prior vote of the shareholders to spend the money. But if they do decide to strike down contribution limits, then we've got a really serious problem. I mean, right now, obviously, wealthier people are giving a lot more money away, but there is an overall cap because they're limited to $5,400 per member of Congress. They can give to all of them. But what if you just you got rid of the contribution limits under the crazy philosophy of the judicial right, and then suddenly the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson and these guys, they could give hundreds of millions just to try and buy Congress as much as possible. So I think it's a very serious problem now, and it's moving in the wrong direction under this court.
And Congressman, I know that you have to go, and it's 4 o'clock. We like to wrap on time, but let's just do a few quick closing thoughts from our millionaires, and then Congressman Raskin will have you close this up. Morris, you want a couple of closing thoughts?
Sure. Just I want to thank everyone. I want to especially thank Congressman Raskin. You've done so much for us in so many areas, and thank everyone for attending. And hopefully we can make some progress over the next few years. Thanks.
Chuck?
Yeah, thank you for your leadership. And I think, we have this 2-tier tax system, one for the privileged and one for everyone else. And I think people are, as you said, Congressman, people are mad about that. And I think we will have a moment and an opportunity to change that.
Stephen?
Congressman, thank you. You're one of the most well-considered and well-read people that we've had on so far. And I won't mention any names, but you've certainly impressed me. But I would also like to say to the people on the call that, look, there was a question in there that says, what do we do to offset this imbalance that's taking place in America? Vote. That's what you have to do. You have to vote. You have to be considerate of what the people that you're voting for, what tax policy they believe in, because I promise you, guns, walls between here and Mexico, whether we let Muslims in or not, whether we have abortion or not, all those things are emotional issues. The issue that drives the quality of your life more than any other issue out there is tax policy. Be micro focused on the significance of that in your decisioning process.
And so I'll just close with saying go to taxtherich.com. And Congressman Raskin, I'm so happy you're my congressman. Thanks for being here. Any closing thoughts?
Well, thank you, Erica. What a delight to be with you and Morris Pearl and Stephen Prince and Chuck Collins. You guys are doing amazing work. And, you know, the core principle of democracy is one person, one vote. That's a statement of political equality. And in the market, we say, let the highest bidder wins. But we've got to keep fences between the two. But when we allow the inequality of the market to come and dominate in the democracy, then we start to lose what democracy is all about. And that is happening. And then, you know, those who have financial and economic power use that power in politics to reproduce and to expand their inequality over everybody else. And that's where we are right now, to the point where we've got, from my own personal perspective, speaking only for myself, and I know it may be controversial, but we have a president who's been using the government itself as an instrument of self-enrichment instead of as the instrument for pursuing the common good and the public interest. So thank you for paying attention to the integrity of the tax system, which should be the arena where we establish our equality, and we establish the fact that progressive taxation means that those who get more out of our system also have to put more back in rather than less.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for being here. We so appreciate it. Congressman Raskin, you're so fabulous. Thank you so much, team. Taxtherich.com. Thanks a lot. Y'all have a great afternoon.